Well, every time you get to work on something, you get that wonderful opportunity to deepen it. And being back in the room with Eve, reading the text out loud, making some changes, feeling how the show resonates today. I mean, I always say the beauty of the theater is we can change it. It's a live form. Every day, the planet rotates, the air is different, and we can react to that. So that's very much present. We even doing the show over the weekend after the Women's March on Saturday, there was a different reaction and feeling in the room. And this is a show about being present, about being together, about listening. So having the opportunity to revisit now has been a chance to hear it again and to live it and to do it in this much more intimate venue, actually. That's just a wonderful change for us, because at the A.R.T. it's about 600 seats, so this is smaller. And we did have this reveal of the garden, and it was huge and big and wide and vast. And we were thinking, well, this moment was so important to me, so it was how to bring it here to the smaller theater. But I always love that moment when everything widens here, and you do see that's what's right behind is vast and infinite. I have to say that pretty much 90% of what you see on stage is live. These are all real plants. And what happened at ART and what has happened here at Manhattan Theater Club is it becomes like an arboretum here. And we have a horticulturist who comes. When you leave tonight, humidifiers come out, the crew comes, we water them, we take care of them. It's a very interesting thing that happens when your set is alive, because you have to care for it in a different way. So this setting is Eve's loft. And when I started the work on the project, I would go to her loft. And that's how we began. And I had read the memoir, and if you read her book, it talks about her loft. Just like she said tonight, back in my loft. I prayed to the little Buddha's God, but the Tara and the Kali, all of that was in the book. So when I first went in her loft, I was like, I can't believe I'm here. It's like looking at everything that was in the memoir. And then I had this experience of her rereading the story, rereading the memoir, and us staging it and starting to put it on its feet. And she'd just do it in her loft for me. We'd do it on the pillows. We'd do it at on her red couch. We'd got to move over here. That altar is the exact replica of an altar, and the chair is the chair from her house. And I just had this impulse of wanting to recreate an experience that I had, of inviting the audience into her loft where she could just speak to you. Having said that, I've never been someone who's directed one-person shows. I tend to direct things with lots of people. I love companies on stage and ensembles, and so I did feel like this play, even though it was a one-woman experience, feels so vast, because when you're with Eve, you're talking about the world all the time. You're talking about the earth. You're talking about so many things. So I wanted to theatrically make an experience that was larger than her loft. So this feeling of we're here, but then there was space. And I also really felt just a nod to kind of thanking the audience for going on the journey, because it's an intense story, to just have a little gift of come walk in the garden. Take a minute or two before we all rush out into our lives and just take a moment, which we don't get to take in life. Sit on a pillow, walk, see the plants. So that became part of the kind of architecture of not only of the set, but also the experience for the evening. I had been a fan of Eve's for years, as I'm sure many of you here are. You've read about her. I've read the Vagina Monologues. I've followed her and the work she's done around the world for women. And but we had never worked together. And then I was doing Pippin, actually, on Broadway, and I got this email from Eve Ensler saying she wanted to see Pippin. And I got so self-conscious, why does Eve Ensler want to see Pippin? That is not political enough for her. She's, okay, but I'll arrange it. So I got the tickets, and then we met afterwards, and we found a little restaurant in Times Square, a little dive, and we sat and we ordered vegetables at this divey restaurant, and we just talked to each other. And I have to say, she was so generous. She just sat there and said, good for you, you directed that musical. Or you're a woman at the helm of that thing, and look at what you did. And she was so genuine and so supportive. And then it was my turn to say, do you have an artistic home? Because you deserve one. And why don't you come up to A.R.T. and meet and talk with us? And then flash forward, we were up at the theater, and she said, no, actually. I've never had that. And I thought, here's a woman who's running around the world and doing so much and really trying to channel her activism and her care for the world through art. And so Ryan's my colleague at the theater, we just said, be with us. What do you want to do? She had a play she had written, and then she had given me a copy of the memoir. I hadn't read it. By the time she visited us, I had read it. And I said, what about turning this into a piece for the stage? Can we commission it and start working on an adaptation? And that's how it started. The first time we did it, the first step actually was back to the loft. And I arrived one day and I said, okay, so we kind of looked at each other like, what do we do now? How do we start? And I said, why don't you read it out loud to me? And she said, okay. And she went and got a tall glass of water, and we sat in by her kitchen, and she read the whole book out loud. And it took about 5 hours. And she was reliving it. And, we got up to the section on Angelique, and she said, okay, here I go. She went through that. I think we took one bathroom break in the 5 hours. And that's how we started. And then it was clear we had to make it shorter. So it was a process. We transferred the book into a Word document. It was very rudimentary, and then we started cutting it, and we put pages all over the floor, and we'd cut things and try them, and started to make a structure in the 3 parts you saw tonight: somnolence, burning, and then the second wind, and tried to give the piece and kind of a rhythm musically, in like a piece of music over 3 movements, and you were there painstakingly, line by line, changing things, cutting, taking it out, and just hearing it and hearing what resonated. Well, what you do when you take a novel and you adapt it, you're actually thinking, what can you do that's not just in the words, right? What can we do through gesture? What can we do through space? And then I did feel video could be very powerful. So Finn Ross, who's the designer, I thought, did this brilliant job of just being in the room, and he just put things up, and I'd look at them and say, wow. I mean, the video that blows my mind every night is when she's getting the chemotherapy, and all of a sudden, I don't even know what that is. He was here the other night. I said, what is that? And it's like red, it's like a tree. And she's talked about the infusion suite being like a rainforest of all the chemicals hanging in the bags, and then all of that goes, and then the Taxol comes in, this yellow thing moves like a tree, and so it was just I think it was a space of every person in the show responding to the work, responding to Eve, responding to what she stands for, what she represents, how we could each bring our own self to it. I have to say, it was delightful to be in the room with one person and just be there. But of course, it's never one person, right? Because you have the world and Mama C and all of the characters. I mean, Toast, she keeps saying Toast, who's her assistant, the wonderful thing she writes with the loyalty of Kent and King Lear. I had met Toast, and Toast would come with Eve to rehearsals, and then we got to meet Dr. Sue, that genius therapist who gives that analysis of chemotherapy. So Sue came one day, and Sue recorded that. That's actually Dr. Sue. That's her voice. So there was a constant community of characters, of people, photos we were looking at. And then, it was extraordinary. I mean, when we were doing the show at A.R.T., Eve would say, look, here are all the women in the Congo. Look, they're going to say hello. And everybody would crowd around the little iPhone, and they'd be waving to us from the Congo. So, and then actually Mama C came. And by the way, you should know, there's a whole series of these talks, and Mama C is coming. I think it's right after February 14th. She'll be here for 3 days, and she will do these discussions. And it's extraordinary to meet her and have her tell us about what is going on, right now in City of Joy. And the Mayo doctors came, and they're coming here for one of these talks to talk about how their practice was transformed by this experience. What Eve constantly talks about are goddesses. This I would say it's less about her being a practicing Buddhist, but more about goddesses and inspiration from goddesses. And so that's why there's the Tara, there's Kali. If you look to the altar, there are little altars to Isis and other goddesses. But certainly the idea of meditation and connection to the earth is obviously a theme in the whole show. And I think that awareness of connection and letting go of the material is very connected to the tenets of Buddhism. Even I've been talking about a play she has been wanting to write that we've been developing. And I have been encouraging her to make it an epic. And because I really thought one day, I was like, we have all these big two-part plays, right? Nicholas Nickleby, Coastal Utopia, The Kentucky Cycle, Angels in America. Like, when has a woman been given that much real estate in the theater? It's almost like we don't even think that we could write that epic and do a two-part all-day marathon experience of theater. So, because the ideas she had were sprawling. And she often talks about, which I think is an extension of this work, that we can fight and resist, and it's a tough time that we're living in. For her, she always speaks about we have to have the imagination for another vision. And in her mind, that's what the theater can do. It can actually give us, because sometimes that's why we're stuck, because there's like no ability to envision an alternative. So that's kind of what we're working on, the alternative vision expressed through an epic. And what I also think about Eve, which is another way of saying what you're saying, which I would think you also got from this, is she spent her whole life obsessing about other women, even before City of Joy. I mean, traveling all over the world, witnessing fistula operation, almost obsessively looking at violence against women. And that thing she says in the early part, but she hadn't looked at her own body. Why had she not why had she not been a good caretaker of her own body? So that was really the journey, is cancer threw her into the crisis of her own body, which even though she had looked at the crisis of other women's bodies, she hadn't really looked at her own body. But I know she says, the challenge of City of Joy, and then the final arrival of it, and the opening of it, and the whole experience of it, saved her. I know she feels that way. So there is a website if you're interested. You just Google City of Joy, and it's a beautiful thing you can look at. You can see lots of stuff on the activities there and ways to contribute. There's an amazing documentary made that you can also read about and see. How you approach something that's a one-person thing like this versus maybe a big musical with production numbers. It's a very different challenge. I'm just going to stand so I can see you. Come to this pillow here. It's actually very similar. It's about, the essential action and what feels truthful and what is the event of the moment, and, how can we transform space and the beats and all of it. It's actually very similar. It's just a different attention. Yeah, it's very much about rhythms. It actually didn't feel that different. It's not as crazy and stressful it's like a circus when you're doing musical. There are 3 rooms and music and this and staging and that. It's not like that, which is great. You don't have multiple rooms going at once. It's one room. So it's very concentrated. But the elements of music and rhythm and acting and light and sound and timing and all of that operate in very much the same way. the comment had to do with the reflection of how women have been treated and how that is reflected in the planet and how we treat the planet. That is the essential metaphor in the body of the world. And it's what she says in the prologue, where it's this blurring of the raping of vaginas, the raping of the earth, the pillaging of minerals in the Congo, all of those metaphors. And I love the part. I mean, can you believe she had that abscess infection the day of the BP oil spill? I mean, that is crazy that, she went home and all of a sudden that thing was happening, that we were bleeding oil poison into the ocean the day that she had that infection. So I think if we look for those things, those connections, they're there. And that's very much her journey to get back into her body and into the world, personally into her body. And then if you're in your body, you're in the world.
Okay, well, Diane, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you all for being here as well.
Thank you.